There was a moment. You might remember it exactly. Or you might only remember the feeling. The moment when something shifted. When the warmth that had been so present became something else. Something cooler. Something more distant. And you could not identify what had changed, because nothing on the surface had changed. And yet something fundamental had. And you tried harder. You were more attentive, more available, more patient, more forgiving. You brought more of yourself to the relationship, because somewhere underneath the confusion was the intuition that if you could just give enough, be enough, the warmth would return. It did not return. Or it returned briefly and then withdrew again. And the cycle repeated. And you stayed in it, confused, exhausted, trying, for longer than you can now justify to yourself. And the question you have been carrying since, the question that sits underneath all the other questions, is why? Not why did they treat you the way they did? Why did none of it matter? Why did everything you gave not register? Why did you feel, even when the relationship was at its best, like you were not quite fully seen? Like you were being responded to, but not quite known? Like something was being taken from you, but nothing was being given in return? This video is going to answer that question. The answer is called Narcissistic Supply. And once you understand it, really understand it, at the level of what it means about how they experienced you, everything about what happened will finally make sense. Stay until the very end, because the last thing I say is the most important. Let me start with what narcissistic supply actually is. The term was first developed in psychoanalytic theory. Psychoanalyst Otto Kernberg described the narcissistic personality as characterized by a cold disregard of others, unless those others could be idealized as sources of narcissistic supply. Heinz Kohut went further. He observed that individuals with narcissistic personality disorder mentally disintegrate when cut off from a regular source of narcissistic supply. Not temporarily upset, mentally disintegrate. Because supply is not something they want. It is something they require to function. Narcissistic supply is the attention, admiration, validation, and emotional reactions that a narcissist needs to regulate their sense of self. Not their self-esteem in the ordinary sense. Their ability to maintain a coherent sense of self at all. Here is the most important thing to understand about this. A healthy person generates their sense of self internally. They know who they are regardless of whether anyone is watching, regardless of whether they are being admired, regardless of whether they are receiving attention or validation or emotional reactions from anyone around them. A narcissist cannot do this. They can only experience themselves as real, as valuable, as significant, as existing in a meaningful way, when that experience is reflected back to them from someone else. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, the leading clinical psychologist on narcissistic abuse, describes it precisely. Narcissistic people need validation and admiration, and this need motivates much of their behavior. They seek out status, compliments, excessive recognition, and attention. And this may happen through wealth, appearance, friends who fawn over them, or social media likes. This supply functions like an addictive substance. The narcissist constantly needs more to feel adequate. And withdrawal creates significant psychological distress. Like a parasite, no matter how much you give, it is never enough to fill the emptiness. The hunger is constant and relentless. And here is what that means about you. You were not in a relationship. You were a source. Not because something was wrong with you, because that is the only way a narcissist can experience another person. Not as someone with their own inner life, their own needs, their own valid emotional experience. As a function. As something that either provides supply or does not. As a resource. And this is not a metaphor. It is the actual psychological structure of how a narcissistic person relates to other human beings. Otto Kernberg described it precisely. The narcissistic individual disregards others, unless those others can be idealized as sources of narcissistic supply. Not when they stop performing. Not when the relationship gets difficult. Unless you can provide it. You are not registering as someone who matters. And what you were providing was supply. Not love, in the sense that you understood love. Not connection, in the sense that you sought connection. Supply. The specific emotional fuel that allowed them to maintain the illusion of themselves they required to function. Now let me show you something about supply that most people do not know, and that changes everything about understanding the relationship. Supply is not only admiration and praise and warmth. Negative attention is also supply. Your anger is supply. Your tears are supply. Your confusion and desperation and attempts to reach them are supply. Your reaction, any reaction, confirms their significance, confirms their power, confirms that they exist in a way that matters. An alcoholic's effort to get alcohol can be very similar to a narcissist's effort to satisfy their needs. What narcissists cannot tolerate is not your anger. It is your indifference, your irrelevance, your absence. Not because they love you and cannot bear to lose you, because you are supply. And supply running out is not a loss of someone they care about. It is the terrifying approach of the void, the specific internal emptiness that the supply was covering. This is why narcissists rage when you pull away. This is why they hoover, why they return after the discard, why they reappear months or years later when your life appears to be going well. Dr. Ramani describes it exactly. The narcissist is lying dormant, like a virus in permafrost. They come back not because they miss you. They come back because you were good supply, and the supply is available again. Now let me show you this cycle. Because once you see how supply drives every phase of a narcissistic relationship, the beginning, the middle, and the end, everything that was confusing will stop being confusing. The beginning is idealization, love bombing, the overwhelming attention, admiration, and apparent understanding, the feeling of finally being seen. The narcissist in the idealization phase is not falling in love with you. They are acquiring supply. Your admiration of them is supply. Your belief that they are extraordinary is supply. Your prioritizing of the relationship, your willingness to make them the center, is supply. As Dr. Ramani says, the idealization phase is not about love. It is about acquisition. And they are extraordinarily good at it. Because a person who has spent their entire life dependent on external validation for the experience of existing develops extraordinary skill at reading what another person needs to hear and providing it. Not because they care about you, because providing it secures the supply. Then comes devaluation. The warmth withdraws. The criticism begins. The relationship that felt extraordinary begins to feel unstable, unpredictable, exhausting. And you try harder. You bring more of yourself. You attempt to return to the idealization phase through effort. This is not an accident. The devaluation serves supply purposes.
Your confusion is supply. Your attempts to repair are supply. Your willingness to work harder, to be more, to accommodate more, is supply. The intermittent reinforcement of warmth and withdrawal creates a specific neurological response. The occasional return of the idealization phase, the glimpse of who they seemed to be at the beginning, activates your brain's reward system in the same way addictive substances do. You are not weak for staying. You are neurologically hooked by a supply-seeking system that has been doing this successfully your entire relationship. Then comes discard. The narcissist decides you no longer provide sufficient supply. Maybe you have started asking for reciprocity. Maybe you have begun expressing needs that interfere with their supply seeking. Maybe simply a new source of supply has appeared, fresher, more admiring, not yet aware of the patterns. Dr. Ramani says it directly. Narcissists have often replaced you by next Saturday night. They will post it on social media. Because the new supply is not a person to them either. The new supply is fresh fuel. And fuel does not require mourning when it runs out. It only requires replacement. Now I need to stop and speak to you directly, because I know what is happening right now. You are absorbing something that is clarifying and devastating simultaneously. Clarifying because it finally makes sense. Devastating because of what it means. It means the relationship you understood yourself to be in, the connection you believed you were building, was not mutual. Not in any sense that matches what you experienced it as. They were not building a relationship with you. They were managing a supply source. And I need you to hear the next thing very carefully. Because it is the thing that people get wrong. This is not evidence that you were not worth loving. It is evidence that they were not capable of it. Those are not the same thing. A person who can only experience others as supply cannot love anyone. Not you specifically. Anyone. The inability is structural. It is built into the way they relate to reality. You were not failed because you were insufficient. You were failed because you were in a relationship with someone for whom genuine relationship, in which another person is known and valued and responded to as a
Not withheld from you, specifically. Not available. At all. Now let me show you what supply means for your recovery. Because understanding supply does not just explain the past. It changes how you navigate the present. The first thing is understanding the Hoover. When they come back, and they often do, they are not coming back because they have changed. They are not coming back because they realized what they lost. They are coming back because supply is available again. Because you appeared to be doing well, which makes you supply again. Because the new supply ran out, which makes you a backup source. Because enough time has passed that you might have forgotten, which makes you accessible. Recognizing the Hoover for what it is does not require you to be cold. It only requires you to understand what is actually being offered. Not love. Supply seeking. The same supply seeking that drove the relationship from the beginning. The second thing is understanding why no contact works. Not as punishment, not as a technique to make them chase you, as the only way to stop being supply. Every response you give, every reaction, every confrontation, every moment of emotion is fuel. The gray rock method works for the same reason. Not because you are pretending to be unaffected, because you are refusing to provide the supply that extends the dynamic. The third thing is the most important. You were not a person to them. You were a resource. And that is about their incapacity, not your worth. The version of you that entered that relationship, with your genuine desire for connection, your willingness to be known, your capacity for depth and care, that version was real. The relationship was not. The warmth you felt in the idealization phase was real, in you. The understanding you believed they had of you was real, in you. What was not real was the reciprocity. What was not real was the genuine interest in who you are rather than what you provide. And here's the thing about recovering from a supply relationship that nobody says clearly enough. You cannot get from them what they were never able to give. You cannot retroactively receive the acknowledgement that what happened was real, and that it hurt, and that you deserved better. Not because it is not true, because the acknowledgement requires them to experience you as a person. And that is the one thing the supply structure does not permit. The acknowledgement has to come from somewhere else. From people who can see you as a full human being. From your own growing certainty about what you know and experienced and deserved. From the specific work of rebuilding the relationship with yourself that the supply dynamic required you to set aside. Because in a supply relationship, you are also making yourself supply. You are also relating to yourself as something to be offered, rather than someone to be known. And the recovery is, in part, learning to be a person to yourself. Not a resource, not a supply source. A person, with needs that matter, with an inner life that deserves attention, with a story that is yours, not defined by what you were to someone who could not see you. And now, the thing I promised. The most important thing. You were never the person they showed you they thought you were. You were never insufficient. You were never too much. You were never the problem. Those were the stories a supply system told to maintain its supply. Who you actually are, the person who entered that relationship with genuine hope for genuine connection, that person is still there. Underneath the confusion and the exhaustion and the years of trying to be enough for someone who was constitutionally unable to recognize enough. That person was always there, always worth knowing, always deserving of a relationship in which they were the person, not the resource. Go find those relationships. They exist, and you deserve them. If this video finally gave you the language for what was happening in that relationship, please share it with one person who is still inside one and still wondering why nothing they give is ever enough. Tell them it is not about the giving. It is about the structure of who is receiving. Subscribe. Because this channel exists to give you the truth about yourself that the supply relationship required you